You know that one movie you've seen so many times you could recite it in your sleep? The one with the leather jackets, the perfectly slicked hair, and dance moves that somehow made a school gym look like the coolest place on the planet? Yeah, we're talking about that 1978 classic that turned a stage show into a worldwide obsession and made an entire generation believe high school was basically one long choreographed music video. Spoiler alert, it was not. But that's beside the point. Today we're pulling back the curtain on everything that went wrong, went weird, and went absolutely sideways during the making of one of the most beloved musicals ever put on film. From casting disasters to actual medical emergencies, from corporate logo wars to costumes held together by literal thread and prayer, this movie's behind-the-scenes story is almost more entertaining than the film itself. Almost. Let's start with the cast, because nobody in that high school looked remotely like they belonged in a high school. Hollywood in the late 70s had a very loose definition of teenager, and the casting team leaned into that definition so hard it basically collapsed. The actress playing the resident tough girl was actually in her early 30s at the time of filming. But here's the thing, that's exactly why it worked. You cannot fake that level of world-weary confidence. No actual 17-year-old walks into a room with that kind of energy. It has to be earned. Another cast member was already going gray at 30 and had to dye her hair for the role every single day. Her roots grew back so fast that the makeup crew resorted to filling them in with a black crayon every morning on set. A crayon. To keep her looking like a high schooler. The glamour of show business, right there. Even the two leads weren't exactly fresh out of homeroom. The male lead was 23, which was at least in the ballpark. The female lead was 29 and was so concerned about how she'd come across on camera that she insisted on doing a screen test before committing to the project. And we all bought it completely. Nobody in 1978 was sitting in that theater doing age math. They were just along for the ride. Speaking of the female lead, she almost didn't sign on at all without one very specific condition attached to her contract. The original stage version of the show had no real standalone moment for her character. No solo ballad, no emotional spotlight, nothing that let her show off what she could do as a recording artist. So her contract included a clause requiring them to write her one. The problem? The song didn't exist yet. They were already deep into production when her producer finally delivered it. By that point, the rest of the cast had already wrapped and gone home. So she came back to set alone, and that's why her character is by herself in that scene, not because the story called for it, but because the schedule forced it. Even her look had to be recreated from scratch, and if you pay close attention, you can spot tiny differences from how she looked earlier in the film. That song went on to earn the only major awards nomination the movie ever received. It became one of the most recognizable ballads of the entire decade and completely transformed her career. What started as a contractual demand became the emotional heart of the film. Sometimes the conditions you put in a contract end up changing everything. Now let's talk about the finale, because what looked like pure energy and perfect timing was actually barely controlled chaos held together with adrenaline and about 20 minutes of preparation. The producer hired a real traveling carnival, actual rides, actual attractions, and set it up on a high school football field. The cast showed up to work and found a full Midway waiting for them. Here's the part that'll get you, the big closing number that everyone now associates with the film. Nobody knew it existed until they were standing on set ready to shoot. The cast had been rehearsing a completely different song for weeks. The replacement arrived so late that the choreographer had roughly 20 minutes to put together the entire sequence you see on screen. 20 minutes. For one of the most iconic dance finales in musical history. All that excitement and energy you see on everyone's faces is completely real. They were hearing that music for the first time. One cast member playing a background character got strapped into a spinning carnival ride for take after take until the director got the shot he needed. When they finally called cut, he climbed off, walked to the nearest patch of grass, and got sick. That's dedication. The dance competition scene was its own special kind of misery. It was filmed in a high school gymnasium in the middle of a California summer with no air conditioning. Then they added massive production lights, packed the room with bodies in thick, non-breathable period costumes, piled on enough hairspray to be considered a fire hazard, and the temperature on that floor reportedly climbed to over 115 degrees. And there was a meat processing facility nearby. So whenever someone cracked a window looking for relief, the breeze that came in was not exactly what they were hoping for. That sequence took 5 full days to film. By the end, hair and makeup were falling apart, several cast members collapsed from heat exhaustion, and at least one was hospitalized for dehydration. Those glistening, shiny faces you see on screen. Not the glow of performance. That's 5 days of survival. The drag race sequence looked incredible on camera. Behind the scenes, it was a genuine health crisis. The location was a concrete drainage channel that collected runoff from across the city. By the time the crew arrived, whatever was sitting in that riverbed had been baking under the California sun for weeks. The cars drove through it repeatedly over 3 days, spraying contaminated water on everyone nearby. The director was walking around barefoot because of the heat, cut his foot on the concrete, and kept working. By the next morning he had a significant fever and was barely functioning, but production couldn't stop, so he just pushed through it. One of the actresses in the scene had actually checked herself out of a hospital mid-testing just to make it to set that day. Between takes she was leaning against the cars because she physically couldn't stand on her own. She got through the scene, went straight back to the hospital that night, and doctors discovered she had needed emergency surgery the entire time. She had no idea what was wrong with her. She just knew she had a scene to finish. Behind one of the most celebrated musical films ever made, there was a director running a fever, an actress who needed an operating table, and a river nobody should have been standing anywhere near. There was also a quiet little corporate war happening in the background that you've probably walked right past 100 times without noticing. The diner set got dressed with a particular brand signage all over the walls, which looked great, except the producer had already signed a promotional deal with their direct competitor. When he spotted the rival logos in the footage, a reshoot was completely out of the question financially. So the solution was to blur them out using old-school optical effects applied directly to the film negative. Clunky, obvious, and if you know where to look, still visible today. They couldn't even fix all of them. One cooler was just too prominent to alter convincingly, so they left it, hoping nobody important would complain. The 40th anniversary release finally digitally replaced the blurred sections, but the editing marks are still visible if you're paying attention. 40 years later and a soft drink rivalry is still playing out in the background of a malt shop scene. The costume everyone associates with the film's final transformation almost didn't hold together long enough to film. The pants weren't custom made, they were genuine vintage pieces from the actual era the film was set in, tracked down specifically for authenticity. There was only one pair. No backups. No doubles. One rip and the entire production would have been in serious trouble. When the actress first tried them on, the zipper was already broken. Rather than risk damaging decades-old fabric by replacing it, the costume department came up with a different solution. They sewed her into them every single morning. Once she was stitched in, that was it. No comfortable sitting, no casual movement, and any bathroom break required the crew to carefully unpick the stitching, help her out, and then sew her back in again. She danced through every kick and spin in that finale knowing those vintage seams could give out at any second. The character looks like the freest version of herself on screen while the actress is literally trapped in old fabric held together by thread and sheer determination. The role of the male lead was first offered to one of the biggest television stars of the era, the guy who had basically already made 1950s cool his entire brand on a hit weekly series. He turned it down immediately. He was terrified of being permanently defined by one type of character. He was already the leather jacket guy on television every week, and he didn't want to lock himself into that identity forever on the big screen too. That decision opened the door for an actor who had actually already performed the role on stage in a touring production. He could sing. He could dance. His mother had run a dance studio and he had trained seriously with professional choreographers. He arrived on set already fluent in every physical demand the role required and delivered a performance that nobody has been able to replicate in the decades since. The actor who passed on the role later said he understood he'd made a mistake. He put it simply, while he was at home, the other guy went out and bought a plane. Can't argue with that math. The film came out in summer 1978 with modest expectations. It was made on a budget that would barely cover a single scene in a modern blockbuster. What happened next caught everyone off guard. It didn't just succeed. It became the highest-grossing film of that entire year, beating out films that had seemed unstoppable. It knocked a beloved classic out of its long-standing record as the top-earning musical in history and held on to that domestic title for nearly 4 decades. Big-budget spectacles came and went through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s without ever coming close. It wasn't until the late 2010s that other musicals finally caught up. Made for $6 million. Earned nearly $400 million worldwide. That's 66 times its budget, from a movie about teenagers who were not actually teenagers, filmed in a gymnasium where people were passing out from the heat, built on songs that barely existed before they were needed. And honestly, that's kind of perfect. The whole film was chaos held together by creativity, stubbornness, and people who refused to quit, which is basically the same energy the characters have on screen. Sometimes the messiest productions make the most unforgettable movies. And that's a wrap. Drop a comment telling us which of these behind-the-scenes moments absolutely floored you. Hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and share this with whoever you know who's still singing that finale in the shower. We'll see you next time.